the first, the meeting will be different parts. Chapters. I'll start with the QFTest component node and its details, and then I'll show you how to use a generic component node, and the next part will be how to deal with problems when you have regression tests and a component is moved by the developers from one position in a dialog to another one, or you have more buttons than you had before. And then I'll show you what resolvers are about, and I'll show you how to create a resolver. And finally, I'll show you how to use web resolvers. So I'll start with the component node, and I'll open an existing test suite for the Swing demo that comes with QFTest. So you can navigate to the example test suites. Here, when QFTest starts without opening a test suite right away, then you have that welcome screen where you have Explore Sample Test Suites. And then I can navigate right to that dialog here and open a Swing demo, and there's a dependency reference which will start the demo application for me. So there's the demo application, and now I want to record just a component, so I can activate the recording functionality, and I'll just click that text field for the discount and stop the recording. And there's a mouse click. And when I click that button, or the node, then QFTest will highlight the text field in the application. And here you see the field QFTest component ID, which says discount value, and that's the sort of link from your tests down to the Windows and Components section, where all the information that QFTest needs to find the component in the GUI is saved. So I'll navigate to that node via locate component, and you can see that that's a text field. And when I click it, you can see it's being highlighted. And you see the discount value, that's the ID that was used in the mouse click. So that's the link between the tests and the component information. And all the rest of the fields are information for QFTest how to find the component in the GUI. So the first field is the class name of that component, which means we have different types of components. We've got text fields and buttons and tables, checkboxes. So that type goes in here. And then the next field is a name that the developer gave to the component. So with Swing applications, the developer has the option to set a name via the command setName. With JavaFX, it's not the name. It's not the name, but an ID. So developers can set IDs with Java objects. With SWT, it doesn't have neither name nor an ID, but there's a certain naming convention that QFTest looks for, and if it finds anything, it'll put it in this name field. And with web applications, you can have ID attributes, and you can have name attributes as well. And if one of them is set, then QFTest will use that. And if both are set, then QFTest, I think, first goes for the name and then for the ID. Right. And those two fields, they are a unique identifier for any component, usually. Well, some developers are not that accurate about unique names. Then you need another information to make it unique, which I'll show you later on. But normally, the class and the name should be a unique identifier for any GUI element in one dialog. If they exist, QFTest will not look at the rest of the information. However, if there's no name, then QFTest will take into account the other fields and sort of make a probability calculation where the feature counts highest and the geometry counts lowest. The feature is either a text that directly belongs to a component, like the text on a button belongs to the button object, or the link belongs to the text of the link belongs to the link object. And here we have a label called discount. So that's another text that QFTest uses for features. Sometimes if it doesn't find neither a text that belongs directly to the object nor a label, it also looks for the tooltip if it exists with a component and may use the tooltip as a feature. And then you have a number of extra features. Most of them are set to ignore. They have to do with the class. So the class that QFTest put up here, that's we call it a generic class name because the text field is called text field with QFTest, with Swing and with FX and with Web. Although within Java Swing, it would be a JText field. So that's what the developer used. And that's derived from the system class. So sometimes that differs when the developer derived the actual class from some other system class. And that's what QFTest made of it. So normally this information about the original class is set to ignore. Only with, well, usually you don't even need it. So you can leave it at ignore. Only with the web components, you sometimes have a more specific information here, and you may want to use it instead of additionally to the class name that QFTest came up with. So sometimes with web components, you may want to set the system class or whatever that is with web to should match, and then that will be taken into the probability calculation that QFTest does. And there's one extra feature that's set to should match. You'll see that has a certain redundancy with this feature up here. Yes, and that is because this feature existed long before this extra features table was introduced. Because of backwards compatibility, it had to be kept. So we couldn't discard it and just have the QFS label extra feature. So we still have the feature field up here, which always has the state should match. You can't set this to must match. So that's why it's redundant, because here you can also say state equals must match, and well, then you can also delete the feature up here if you don't want to have the redundancy. That's the difference between the two fields, that this can be set to must match. And the next information that QFTest keeps for recognition is how many of those text fields are in the parent component. In our case, there are 4 text fields, and this one has the index 2, which means it's the 3rd text field, the index starting at 0. And finally, there's the geometry, so the X and Y offset in pixels from the parent component or within the parent component, and the width and height of the text field itself. That's the information you get in the component node. And then the next sort of chapter will be how to generate generic component. So you have 2 different types how to make a component generic. Either you can use this regular expression up here, or with the extra features, or you can have variables that you use as the value. So first I'll show you how to, well, maybe use a regular expression, but not here, but with the window. You can see that this window component has a title, and the title has been put into that feature field, and it's exactly the string that you can see in the window title, so it's version 1. And very likely with the next version, the version number will be different, and then QFTest won't find the window anymore because of the different number. If I want to show you something here, because of the name, QFTest will ignore the version number totally anyway. So I could put a 4 here and say OK, and well, can either click it and it'll have the highlight border around it, or can say highlight the component. You can see the border around the window. So if I want to show you the use of a feature as a regular expression, I need to delete the name, and as far as I know, I just set the geometry to ignore as well. It's enough to put a dash in the X field. So now when I say highlight component, QFTest can't locate it anymore. So now I'll introduce a regular expression, and I'll use dot asterisk. Regular expressions are used for a dot stands for any character, and the asterisk for either none or any number of characters of things before the asterisk. So this means either nothing or any number of characters after jQuery configurator version. And I need to tell QFTest to read that as a regular expression. Okay. So now when I highlight that, QFTest finds it again. So that's one way to use a component node to identify windows with different version numbers. So it's a bit generic, not terribly. And I will go back to the text field and I'll create a text field component node. I'll call it generic text field. The class name is text field. And I don't want to give it a name, but I want to, in this case, use an extra feature. I'll put it to must match. Yeah, and that'll be QFS label. And as a value, I'll use a variable with the name label. Okay. And I don't want QFTest to evaluate the geometry at all. Right, so now I have a component which is not really defined yet because the label has not been defined. So I'll close this recording and add some node where I can define a variable. Set variable, name is label, and value, for example, base price. Right. Now I need to execute that set variable. And just to show you that it has a value, I'll enter the debugger. I don't want to execute anything. I just want to open the variable stack down here. And you can see we've got two global variables, one for the client connection, and the other one is the one I just set. So label is set to base price. And because it's a global variable, it doesn't matter whether some test is active or not. It's there in the background. Right, so now I can click that text field and you can see the text field for the base price is highlighted. And when I change that to specials price, and I need to execute that again, I want to show you that its value in the global variable has changed. So now we got specials price in that variable. It doesn't matter, we can leave the debugger on. And when I click that generic text field now, then it highlights the text field for the specials price. But it's okay to use it like that. Set the variable. Now I want to insert some action. So I insert a mouse event. That goes to this client defined by that variable for the client connection. And then I put my generic, the QFTest ID of the component, generic text field. That's what I called it. And I want to replay that mouse click as a hard event, which means the mouse pointer will be moved actually. Otherwise, the mouse wouldn't be moved really. So I want to stop that and just execute the mouse click. So that goes to the text field of the specials price. And I find it a bit awkward always to have to say set variable, and then I can actually address or use the generic text field to execute some action. So that can be done much nicer when you use a procedure and pass the variable as a parameter. So I'll just pack that into a sequence, and I want to give that the name click, and then I can transform the sequence into a procedure. So that's the quickest way to get a procedure. And I'll add that to the procedures. And now I can use it. Oh, we need some parameter here. Label, maybe with a standard value, discount. Okay. Now I want to add another test case to show you how that it's quite easy to use that procedure. And then one click to the standard value. Now we'll use final price. Okay, and again base price. And now when I execute that test case, QFTest will first move the mouse to discount, then to final price, and then to base price. So that's quite a nice way. You can use generic components and put them into a procedure and then pass the value for the variable. Here, that's where the variable is being evaluated. And then replay some action on the component defined by that label. You can ask questions, but I'd like to ask you to ask them in the end. And either you can write them in the chat anytime. Then sometimes when I have a look at the chat, I can integrate the answers into my presentation right away, if that fits. If it doesn't fit, then I'll answer your questions at the end of the webinar. So that's one sort of generic, or the second sort of generic component. Another one would be that you have an OK button in different panels, and you don't want to record the OK button for every panel, but you want to record it once and then make that structure generic so that the OK button can be addressed in the tests for any dialog that is open and has the OK button. I'll show you the dialogs. That's the Edit Vehicles dialog, and it has this Cancel and OK button. And here you've got the Edit Specials dialog. Again, these two buttons, and also the Accessories dialog. Same. So I'll record a click to that OK button and stop it. And now I want to jump to the component. So the quickest way is to locate the component. You can double click it as well. That's the same functionality. Only I want you to be able to follow what I'm doing, so I'll always use the pop-up. Right, so we've got an OK button here, and I know that the other OK buttons have the same name, so I don't have to do anything there. And because of the name, it doesn't matter that in the other dialogues it's not the same class index or neither the same geometry. But because of the name, all the other information is not important anyway. Right. Same with the panel. It's got the same name with the other dialogues. So it's just dialogue itself that I want to make generic. You can change the QFTest ID to your liking. And here I don't want to leave it at accessory dialog because that could be misleading. I want it to be called generic dialog. You can always change the QFTest ID of any recorded component if it doesn't suit your liking. There's some, you mustn't use all characters. Some special characters are not allowed, but QFTest will tell you if you try to use one that's not allowed. Quite a lot that. But apart from that, you can put anything up here that you like. Right, we don't want that name because that's different with the other dialogues. So I'll delete that. And the feature, yeah, that's edit and then something. And I showed you the regular expression with the window title. I'll use a regular expression here as well. And on there, regular expressions don't just have to be the dot and an asterisk, but there's quite a lot of other expressions that you can use. You can look it up in the manual or in Wikipedia, for example, get a good explanation of regular expressions. But because there are so many characters that could belong to a regular expression, I'll just show you that you can use the pop-up menu and say escape text for regular expressions. I can put brackets, for example, are part of regular expressions. So if you want to tell QFTest that those should be part of the text itself, you have to mark them and put a backslash in front of the brackets to tell QFTest that that's not part of a regular expression, but part of the text to look for. So if I say escape text for regular expressions, then QFTest does exactly the same thing. It puts the backslashes for any in front of any characters that belong to a regular expression. And it puts the tick mark into that checkbox. So now I don't want any of this, but I want to have my real regular expression dot asterisk. And then I'll set this to ignore. And we can set the geometry delete it as well because it won't be the same with the other dialogues. So we'll get rid of it. You want to update the references? Yes, we can update that one mouse click. No, it doesn't. Because the dialog itself is not being referenced. It's just the button within the dialog that's being referenced. So that's fine. And now I can open this dialog and replay that mouse click. And yeah, maybe you saw the dialog closed, but the mouse didn't move. So to make it a bit easier for you to follow the action, I'll set hard event again. And this time I'll open the specials dialog and replay the mouse click. And then it finds that OK button, and the same with the accessories. When I replay the mouse click there, it'll find that too. And this time I don't have to set any variable at all, because the information that QFTest has is that it has to look for a dialog where the title starts with edit, and then you have any string after that. And within that dialog, QFTest looks for this panel. You can see it's being highlighted. And within the panel, it looks for the OK button. And since the structure within the dialogs is always the same, QFTest will find the button. And if you have dialogs where you have the button, but you're not sure about the panels, or either you don't know whether they're different, or you know they are different and you want to get rid of them, then you can also move that OK button to the level directly underneath the dialog, and QFTest will still find it. It doesn't need that information about the panel. Yeah, I'll replay the mouse click in a bit, but that panel is over, and you don't want to drag around superfluous stuff. So QFTest has a functionality that you can check whether anything is being used and then even remove it straight away. So you can say remove unused components, and QFTest will check whether any test or in the extras, any action references that panel, which obviously none did, and then QFTest removes the node. Okay, so when I click that button, window can't be executed. No, I want to click let QFTest execute the mouse click. Right. You can use regular expressions either with the feature, or you can use regular expressions with the QFS label, or other extra features. But you can't use regular expressions with the name. That's not possible. Yeah, there's not here at any rate, but you can use a resolver, a name resolver, for example, that I'll show you later on. And there in that algorithm that extracts the information, there you can use regular expressions to match the name field or the name set by the developer. Okay, now was that about the generic components. And now I want to show you what to do when you have a new version of the program and your tests have been developed for the older version and run on the older version, and now you are asked to do the regression tests, and some components have been moved or the version has been changed. Yeah, so I'll open just navigate onto the test suite documents here. Okay, so that is a test suite that was developed for the older version of the program, and now we'll try and run it and adapt it for the version 1.0. Oh no, it starts in German. Okay, it's German, but we don't have to. Doesn't matter to us whether it's German or English at the moment. Main thing is that it's looking for the window at the moment. It's waiting for the window to appear, but it does not recognize the window because the title changed. So it says I can't determine the window. So now we've got to find out why can't find it, what changed. So the proceeding is always the same. You say locate component in the Windows and component sections and mark the old version, the old node. You can do that by saying right-click, marks, toggle mark. So you have a mark here, and then you record the new component and compare the two. So now record just a mouse click somewhere, and I'll navigate to that panel, and here I can see there's the window. Window wasn't found. The rest is not interesting, and I'll put them next to each other. I can still mark it. It's easier to see. And now I can look at the two and see what's changed. So the old component had version 0.b, the new's 0. So I'll do exactly what I showed you before with the regular expressions for the feature. I'll say escape text for regular expressions, and because of that dot, which is part of regular expressions, QFTest puts the backslash in front of the dot, thinking that's part of the text, but really I want to get rid of the whole version, including the dot, and put dot asterisk. Okay. Here I changed the old node. I adapted the old node by using a regular expression, and now I can delete the new node, and then I can get rid of that mark, toggle the mark, and you see that QFTest is in debug mode. I didn't have to stop the run, and I can just unpause the run and let QFTest go on with the test. And now QFTest is trying to click that table, and something happened to the old table, so QFTest can't find it anymore. So I'll do the same thing. I'll locate the component, mark it, and then record a click to the table as it is now. Again, locate the component and mark the component. And now we see that the table has been moved into panels. And when we have a look here, yeah, that one has no name, that one's got a name, and yeah, also in those panels. So I don't want to adapt the old component, but now I want to use the new node with its information and the hierarchy that it's in now. And yeah, the easiest way to do is to do this, to tell all the tests up here that they are supposed to use the new component, is to change the references, this table 2, to the new node. So this @ sign, the one that's just the index, but the QFTest records the table component and then addresses cells via the index. So that's not recorded down here. That's just part of the addressing in this QFTest component ID to get at the cell. So I'd need to change this bit that identifies the table, but I don't want to do it manually here because in normal tests you'd have to do it in many nodes usually, and that's not that easy to find them. Or you could, but it's just a lot of hassle, and it's much easier to use the functionality that QFTest has, that when you change the QFTest ID, then QFTest will check all the references for you and update the references. So that's what I want to do. I'll update the QFTest ID of the old component, set it to the new QFTest ID. And now the first thing that QFTest will tell me is that that already exists, that QFTest ID. And if you're sure that you want to proceed, press yes. That's what I'll do. If you don't want to do just that trick, then usually you don't want to proceed, then just say no. And so I'll say yes. And that's the important bit that I was intending, but that I'm intending to make use of. QFTest asks me whether it should update all the references. Yes, please. So it finds just the one click. So when I double click that, I can say jump to node, or double click. That takes me here, and you can see QFTest changed the this field, updated table 2 to vehicles table. And now that's important. Then you don't forget to delete the old component. Delete. And now when I say locate component, QFTest goes to the new component, and you can see that it finds it. So now I can let the test run on. Again, I haven't stopped the test, and can just go on when I sorted that out. And now I want to show you a different thing still. Okay. I will get rid of that mark first. I can say clear mark in this tree. Then if we had more marks, they'd be deleted as well. So now, same thing. I'll say, look, don't want a breakpoint. Locate component and mark it and record. And now I don't want to trigger the action. So if I pressed OK now, it would trigger the action and record a mouse click. If I say record check, then this action will not be triggered. And then I can go on with my test, because that's waiting at the mouse click. So I don't want the dialog with the mouse click disappear. If I record a check, that won't trigger the action. Okay. And again, I can say locate component, and now you can see when I have a look at the details, that the details are the same apart from the QFTest ID, but that has to be unique, so that's fine. But all the information QFTest uses for recognizing the component are the same. So now I have to check in the hierarchy where the information changed. So usually you have a deeper hierarchy, but the point where the differences are is usually the same. Like I have this panel and that panel. They're different for the two components, for the old and the new one. And then you have the dialog up here. That's the same for both. So you've got the branch in the tree, one branch leading off to the new component, one leading off to the old component. And where that branch is, that's where you need to look for the differences. So in our case, the new one is in the Change Button panel, and the old one was in an OK Button panel. So obviously with the new version, the developers decided to get rid of the OK Button panel. So now what we need to do is just get rid of that button. And in this case, again, we'll use the new component. And yeah, I could update the references of the old button to use the to point to OK Button 2, or in this case, I'll change the QFTest ID of the new component so that this will be found by the existing links. Yes, I want to have the same. No, I don't want to update anything at the moment. And now I can get rid of that button. I need to delete it so there are no duplicate components. And here I can use the find unused components functionality, or remove it straight away, whatever you like, whether you want to check it first or have QFTest remove it, because there might be a wait for component on that panel somewhere. So I use that functionality. It was not used anywhere, so not that's fine, and we don't need the mark anymore, and can go on with the test. Right. So there with the exceptions, we handled them, and the test now runs for version 1. Regression test passed, and we can save that with the correct name. And like this. Okay. Right. So that's what I wanted to show you with how to handle regression tests when components have been moved. Right. There's one more thing. For example, if that used to be yes at first, maybe, and a different class index, like that. So minor things changed with some button. Well, in our case, QFTest will find it anyway because of the name, but you can always tell QFTest to just check all the components in that panel and update any information that's not correct anymore with the new version. So you could say on dialog level, update components and update all the child nodes, and maybe adapt the QFTest IDs so they're not historic, but match the information that like the QFTest ID will first be like the name, and if there's no name, then it would be the feature and the class before that, something like that. So QFTest would update that as well and update all the references too. Okay, and then show us a list of updated components. So we have 2 components that are not shown on that dialog. Have a look. That's the edit panel and the maker panel. So close. That's because we are in that dialog edit accessories, and those two were in the other dialogs. And that's the disadvantage, that this regular expression, what we first had, has been removed. So we need to put that back to the regular expression. So the advantage is that for the OK button, the information has been set again when you do update component. But if you have any regular expressions that match the current component, QFTest will put the information that belongs to the current component instead. Right, then I'll go on to resolvers. QFTest uses resolvers all the time when it's either recording a component, when you do a recording, or when you replay a test and QFTest has to find the component in the GUI. So QFTest has procedures or methods that analyze the GUI component and determine the class of that GUI component. Then there are other methods, other resolvers that try and determine the name. Another resolver will look at the information that it gets from the GUI to find the feature. So with the text fields, it has to look at, well, it doesn't look at the text field itself, but it looks for some label around the text field. It starts to the left, and then it looks above the text field, then right, then under it. And if it finds something suitable, it'll come up with the label. And now I can go back to the English version and, well, just go on with the English. Start that again. Right. And in the meantime, while that starts, I was quick. We can have a look at either text fields. Yeah, let's have a look at the text fields. So there are all the different fields, and there are different resolvers for every field. And QFTest keeps lists where all the procedures or resolvers, whatever you call it, we call it resolvers in that context, are listed. And QFTest executes all resolvers that are listed for the name field and executes them one after the other to find the correct class for this as a text field for the class name field. Or then it executes all the resolvers for the name and so on. And you can extend the lists and add your own procedures to the list as a resolver. And then QFTest will first execute all its own resolvers and then call your procedure. And then you have the procedure will either change the name or not, depending on your algorithm in the procedure. So there's one example where we don't have a name. That's the info dialog. Right, when I record, I don't want to trigger the OK functionality. So I record that. I'll show you another way how to locate a component. That's one way, that you record some action and then do locate component on that action. It's one way. Another way is that you tell QFTest to record the component, and you can see that this arrow is inactive at the moment. So I click the OK button. That doesn't trigger the action either. And then I stop that functionality, and you can see that this forward arrow is active, and I can, when I click it, then QFTest takes me to that button in the info dialog, and neither the button nor the dialog has a name. So now I want to provide a name for that button. So I need to write a script. That's an SUT script system under test script, because I need access to the GUI objects. And in the server script, you don't have access to the GUI objects, only with the system, the script executed in the application context. Right. So the main action of the resolver script is that it adds your procedure to the list of resolvers for that field. So I'll call resolvers.add solver. That's the method that's in that module. And now I need to tell it what to add. The first parameter is the name that the resolver is registered under. So any name, the name button. And then you need to specify the procedure that you'll write. And here you specify the procedure name. So I'll put get name. And with that procedure name, when I stick to the conventions set with those procedure names, then QFTest will know which field to add the resolver for, into which list to put the resolver. And you'll use getName when you want to enhance the list for the name field. And then this add resolver procedure knows that's a name resolver. When you use get a feature, it's a feature resolver. When you say get extra features, then it's a resolver for handling this table of extra features. And last, you need to specify the component that the resolver should be executed for. You can either specify single components, or you can specify the class for which to execute the resolver, or you can even leave it away, then the resolver will be executed for every single component that's being analyzed. So here I want to have QFTest run it for buttons. Now I need to specify the procedure. So I'm writing JSON, and there you have def, and then the procedure name for specifying procedures, then parameters. And when QFTest calls name resolver, then it passes the GUI object, the whole component. That's the first parameter. And then it passes the name that it's come up with so far as the second parameter. The colon is part of the JSON syntax for defining the procedure head. So now we're in the body of the procedure. And here I only want to go on when QFTest has not found a name for a button. So I'll say if not name, and now I need to find the a method within the object, the button object, to get at the text of the button. So I'll say OK. And to find the correct method, you can activate the record components button again, and then right-click the button, and there you have entry for showing the methods of that object. And there you have all the methods that a JButton object has. And I don't need any add functionality. You can tell QFTest just to show the get methods. And now I expect something like get text. So it's all the method names are in alphabetical order. So I'll scroll down, and there's the get text method. The current value is okay. So I'll use this. I can copy it. I can close that again and say label equals get text, but I need to specify the object for which to replay that method. So we get the object via the parameter com get object, and now I need to tell QFTest to make use of that label and insert the label in the name field. So I tell QFTest to return label. In case QFTest does not enter the if branch, then the procedure will return none. And in that case, QFTest will just leave the name as it is. It won't change anything when any of the resolver procedures returns none. Right. To activate the resolver, I need to execute it. I deactivate that functionality. So I execute the resolver script. And now that procedure has been added to the list for the name field, and it'll remain there either until I explicitly remove the resolver, or QFTest is stopped, or I register a resolver with the same name on the same class. Right, so what effect does that have? I could either record that component again, or I could use that update functionality and say, click that button right and say update components. Updated that one component, and you can see that now it's got a name, and because of that update functionality where I said it does not have to use the original QFTest ID for the node, QFTest said, oh, there's the name. That's a very good suggestion for the QFTest ID, so I'll use that. And it updated the button ID. And because I located, there's no mouse click at the moment that referred to the OK button. So that's why QFTest didn't show us any references that it updated. Had to update because the QFTest ID changed. Right, so that's a name resolver. You can resolvers for the class name or the feature, they are equally simple, that you just need to return a string, and if there's a string, then that information in the field will be changed accordingly. And you asked for regular expressions in the name field, and in this algorithm here, you can also put a regular expression so that you have something like get the text of the label, and if label starts with return can return a string as well, something like that. And else it returns the whole label, so or you can just return S. Then sometimes you have IDs with web components that have numbers at the end. Some digits generated by a toolkit that the developers have used to create the HTML components. And those IDs are fine. They're unique within that current HTML page. Only when the page is generated the next time via that tool, then you'll get different IDs. And they'll be unique within the HTML page again, but they're not useful for regression tests because it's a different ID. So typically you need to get rid of those IDs. Yeah, that could be an idea to look for dot or something in that ID and get rid of the rest of the back part of the ID. On the other hand, QFTest has a resolver for web components where it gets rid of funny numbers at the end anyway. That's the place where you can use regular expressions for the names in the resolver. Right, now I want to show you how to use the custom web resolver for web applications. With web applications, you can just as well use these normal resolvers, but you'd have to use a lot of those resolvers and write a lot of those resolvers. Well, that's not fun. So we wrote a procedure where you can set parameters to tell QFTest to map certain HTML components to QFTest classes, which also gets rid of the numeric parts of the IDs generated by toolkits, by some toolkits. Right, so for that I'll start the web resolver, the web application. I want to start it via the quick start wizard. Next, select the web application. Next, now I need to navigate to the HTML page. In the version directory of QFTest, you have the demo subdirectory, and there you have all sorts of demos for different types of applications. So we'll have the web, and then HTML, and then go for the English car config. That's it. Finish. Right, now I can execute that setup node. Right, so that's the web implementation of the same demo, and I want to go on in a new test suite for the web components and record, click to the table and to those text fields and to that button. Now that's the click to that button, locate the component, and can see that QFTest couldn't make much of the tags that have been used and doesn't know that the div really is a button. Or when you have a look at that text input, so that was implemented as a span within some table data as the HTML component. That's okay. QFTest recognizes the component, so I can replay that sequence, and QFTest, or maybe we'll have to, can't see anything without that hard. So let's move the So QFTest finds the components all right. But the component recognition may not be stable. Often you have a very deep hierarchy, tree hierarchy, especially with applications generated by toolkits. And then component recognition is not stable. The toolkit, the panels, they change quickly, and one thing is that the hierarchy is very far down, and then the other thing is that with QFTest tables, for example, you have certain checks. When I say record a check, and I'd usually go onto a table that QFTest knows to be a table because of its class, and I say right click, then you'd have a check for the table header, a check for the row, for the column, for all entries in the column. But here you just get a check for the TD object, and that's just the standard stuff like text. With web you get the class attribute and style attribute, and then just visible image, geometry and tooltip, but none of the table specific checks. So that's the other advantage of having proper QFTest classes. So how to tell QFTest that this div ought to be a button? Just think I'll get this setup node and cut it and paste it into the new test suite as well. Paste. Right. In this launch SUT if not running, you have all the nodes that QFTest needs to start a web application, and the last sequence calls the install custom web resolver, and here you have parameters for mapping the class attribute that some DOM element has to the QFTest class, or for mapping other attributes to a generic class. Can tell QFTest that all TRs, for example, should be table rows. And then when you mapped everything that are useful, you can tell the QFTest to ignore all certain tags to get rid of that deep hierarchy that you often get with toolkits. Right, so now I want to configure that procedure call a bit, and I need to get the information I want to put here. So now I want to make use of this information here, and it tells me that the class attribute of the component has the value button. That looks good. And I can tell QFTest in this procedure call, in the parameter for the generic classes, that when the class attribute has the value button, I want it to be mapped to the QFTest class button that's got a capital B, and the rest is small lowercase. Right, so I need to execute that resolver, and then this information will be added to the list for the class name resolvers. So I can say update component. Okay. And you can see that QFTest turned that div into a button, and I can do the same thing for that. The class that QFTest found, well, it didn't find a class attribute at all. It found a tag, and so it made the QFTest class the same as the tag, which is span, which I find is nothing useful for mapping. I don't want to map all spans to text fields. They may also be used for defining a different type of component. So I'll look up here whether there's something useful in the parent. Yes, that looks a lot better. There's a class attribute in the parent component which is a text field. So I'll map text field, which is the value of the class attribute, to QFTest class text field. Again, the QFTest class has to be spelled exactly with that capital T and F. Okay, and when I execute that and say update components, then we've got that text field, but QFTest doesn't get rid of the span, for example. So now I want to get rid of those tags. We don't want to record. Oh, I wanted to map the panel as well. Which one? We have a table, but that's, when I highlight that, that's been implemented as a table by the developers, but it's not a data table. It's just a table being used for the layout. And QFTest can't tell whether the developers implemented a certain component, a table, as a layout table or as a data table. So QFTest can't do anything about it, and because it doesn't make sense to map that to a data table where you would have to use indexes to get at the values. You want to have that as a text field you can address via the QFTest ID. So we don't want that to be a table, but that's a panel. The class attribute has the value panel, so we can map that as well. Panel equals panel. It's by accident that they are all the same, because our developer used just the lowercase attribute values for the classes. Right, I'll map that and I'll say ignore tags tr and td. Okay, and now I need to execute that, and I want to record it again into a new test suite. Right, so now that looks pretty good. We got a panel for the whole thing, and then the two text fields and the button in that panel. That component recognition will be stable because these fields also have IDs, and QFTest uses them for the name field. So that's a very stable component recognition now. Only when we have a look at the table, that's not okay yet. We still have the TD, and that's not a QFTest table. So with a table, it's not enough just to map one component, because table consists of table cells, and in HTML they are usually located in table rows, TRs. Whereas, well, here we've got a table cell. We told QFTest to drop table rows that have not been mapped, and then you have the table component itself, and you have the header row, and you need to tell QFTest how header cells are implemented. I don't want to do that myself now. I want to show you the whole example for this demo. I never open it from here because that takes me right into the directory for the Java Swing demo. I just need to go one directory up and then into the web directory, and then that test suite, and there you have the usage example for the usage of the custom web resolver. And here you've got the same procedure call. No, this one's the same procedure that's being called, and it starts out just like I did. Sorry. And when we edit this, you can see there have been mapped a lot more class attributes, and here's all the information you need to map a table. So there are elements that have the class attribute with the value data table that's been mapped to the table, data row, that header information. And now when I execute this, and I'll do that again, record, click to the table cell, to that, to the button. Oh, now I can record a check to that table cell, and now you see the check no longer goes onto a TD element, but QFTest knows it's a table cell, and now you get the column. Yeah, let's record a check on the column, the column title, and the standard stuff as well. Now we'll stop the recording. So here you can check the whole column at once. Right, and when we can locate this. And now we have, that's different. Here in this call, in the example, TR elements have not been discarded after the mapping, so they are still recorded. So you can either add that to this, here you have ignore tags. So here only center and diffs, and the other stuff is ignored. When you say TR and TD are to be ignored as well. And let's record that column, this. So now I can say Alt and cursor to the right, that'll open the whole tree at once. So now here we got the table. I haven't executed it, forgot to execute the thing. Right, not even pressed OK. And execute it. And I'll try and update the thing. Yeah, please. Alright, so now we got the text field and the button on the same level. And now I can say remove unused components, and that gets rid of the TR and TD elements. And now I want to show you how to find help on this and on this resolvers as well. Now, one source of information is the procedure itself. So you can say locate procedure, that's in the standard library of QFTest. And there in the comment of that procedure, you have a lot of information on how to use the procedure. This examples 2 is very interesting as well, because here you have additional information on how you can tell QFTest, for example, that you want to use a regular expression for the value of the attribute. So the percent sign tells QFTest that the string following is a regular expression. So you're looking for any attribute. It's attributes to generic classes here. So that is why you have the ID. We are looking at ID attributes with a value ending with list. So anything ending with list will be mapped to the QFTest class list. So that's why you have two equal signs. The first is for the attribute you're looking at, and when that attribute has that value, then it's mapped to that QFTest class. And this at and 2 colons up here at parent means TC is only mapped to table cell if the parent component had been mapped to a table row. And down here it's at : ancestor, which means custom ID attributes that's only used if an ancestor has the QFTest class table. So there's a bit of syntax with defining values in the parameters, and yeah, you can, that's explained here. So there's a lot of information about that procedure in the comment of the procedure itself. And you have information that you need when you map web components in the manual as well. That's in the technical reference. There you have the information about the web mapping of components and also for the resolvers. The resolvers are in the extension APIs. There you have the resolvers module. You have information about the usage, and then the name resolver interface. Yeah, there you have information about the name resolver I showed you, and there's an example for a name resolver. And when you want to map an extra feature, it's useful to have a look at that entry in the manual and then either copy this example when you want to add a new line in the table of extra features, a new row in the table of extra features, and this example modifies an existing row in the extra features. So you first get the feature with that name, and then you set its value to something else. So it's easiest to copy the examples and adapt them. So that's where you find information about resolvers. That's in the extension APIs. And down here you have the generic classes. And you need them here when you want to first know what generic classes exist in QFTest, and you can put in the class name field. For example, you have combo boxes, everything. They are ordered by this. The sentence above the table tells you what all these classes are about. So there's the next list for components that could have a state, like a checkbox that is ticked or not ticked. Then you have components that organize other components, like an accordion, calendar, a menu, stuff like that. And then you have the more complex components like list, table, and tree. And with a table, you have certain functionality that QFTest provides with the table component. So here you can jump to that section, and that tells you that when you click a cell in the table, then it doesn't even tell. QFTest only records the index, saves the information for the table component, but records the index in the mouse click or any other action that you record. And then QFTest looks for a label close to it or for a tooltip, and will use that for the QFS label. And there are those additional checks that come with the table. So here you have the properties of the generic classes. And then in the middle section, you have the information when you want to map a table. It's here. It tells you need to map the table object itself, the row, cell, and the header information. That's the 5 elements you need to map, and the rest is optional. It's not very comfortable yet in the manual, but you get all the information you need to map certain HTML elements to QFTest classes. Right, so that would be the end of the webinar. Bye to you, and thanks for listening to the webinar.